My uncle always warned me about the fields outside his village in Angola. He said that they were ancient places where the old spirits still roamed. When I was a kid, I brushed it off as superstition, just stories told to keep children from wandering off. But in the summer of 2007, I returned to Angola for the first time in years and found out how wrong I'd been. I'd flown back to visit family, hoping to reconnect with my roots after living in the US for so long. My uncle, a quiet but kind man named Joaquim, picked me up from the airport and took me back to his small, isolated village. It was a world away from what I was used to, peaceful but eerie, surrounded by endless fields that seemed to stretch on forever. "You stay inside after dark," Joaquim warned me on the first night. "The fields, they have a way of making people lose their way." I nodded, still brushing it off. I was excited to be back, thrilled to explore, but my uncle's words clung to me like a dark shadow. The village was as small as I remembered, just a few families living there, each one bound by centuries-old traditions. During the day the children played outside, laughing and running through the fields. But as dusk approached, everything changed. Families would rush back indoors, securing their doors and windows, their faces shadowed with fear. One evening, while walking around the village, I noticed an old man sitting by the edge of a field, muttering to himself. His eyes were hollow and he was clutching a small pendant tightly. I recognized him as Senor Paulo, a farmer who'd lost his son Rui to the fields years ago. I didn't know the story well, but I'd heard rumors, something about a curse that had taken Rui. They said he'd disappeared after entering the fields at dusk and had never been seen again. The adults didn't talk about it much, but it was the kind of thing that lingered in the air, like a memory that everyone shared but wished they could forget. The next day I took a walk to explore those same fields. They looked ordinary enough, just tall, dry grasses swaying gently in the wind. But something about them felt off. There was a silence that seemed to deepen as I moved closer, a heavy stillness that swallowed up all sound. I couldn't even hear the birds or the faint hum of insects. Suddenly, I saw a glint of silver among the grasses. Curious, I pushed through and found an old pendant half buried in the dirt. It was tarnished and worn with a faint engraving on it. I wiped it off, trying to make out the details. It was strange, haunting, a face carved in a twisted expression, with hollow eyes that seemed to look right through me. It was eerie, but I thought it might belong to Senor Paulo, so I slipped it into my pocket, planning to give it to him later. As I turned to leave, I noticed something strange. The path I'd taken was gone. The field had closed in around me, grasses thick and unyielding in every direction. I told myself I was imagining things and picked a direction, pushing through, but no matter how far I walked, I couldn't find the edge. The grass grew denser, the silence heavier, pressing down on me until I felt like I could hardly breathe. Panic started to set in. I tried retracing my steps, but it was as if the landscape itself was shifting, twisting around me. My phone had no signal, and the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the field. In my desperation, I started running, thrashing through the grass, hoping I'd break free. But the more I ran, the deeper I seemed to go. Just when I thought I was hopelessly lost, I heard a faint voice calling my name. It was soft, almost like a whisper carried by the wind. "Carlos." I froze, my heart pounding. The voice sounded familiar, too familiar. It was my mother's voice. But that was impossible. My mother was back in Luanda, miles away. Still, the voice kept calling, growing louder, filled with a strange urgency. "Carlos, come this way." I knew I shouldn't follow it, but something in the voice was compelling, drawing me forward. I stumbled through the grass, heart hammering as I searched for the source. The voice grew louder, echoing through the field until it was all I could hear. Finally, I broke through the grass and found myself in a small clearing, where a figure stood with their back to me, cloaked in shadows. They wore a tattered coat and a hat pulled low so I couldn't see their face. "Mom?" I whispered, but even as I said it, I knew it wasn't her. The figure turned slowly, revealing a face that was not human. It was distorted, hollow-eyed, with a smile stretched far too wide across its face. The pendant in my pocket grew cold, as if reacting to the thing in front of me. I took a step back, heart pounding, but the figure held up a hand, its fingers impossibly long and thin. "Give it to me," it hissed, its voice like the rustling of the dry grass. Give back what you took. I fumbled in my pocket, pulling out the pendant. I held it out to the figure, my hands shaking. As soon as it touched the pendant, its face twisted into a look of rage, and it let out a shriek that seemed to tear through the very air around me. Return what was taken, it screamed, its voice echoing in my mind, filling my head with a blinding pain. I dropped the pendant and stumbled back, clutching my head as the world around me spun. When I came to, I was lying at the edge of the field, with my uncle standing over me, his face filled with relief and fear. You went into the fields, didn't you? He asked, his voice trembling. Did you see it? I nodded, still shaking as I tried to process what had happened. What was that thing? My uncle's face grew grim. The fields are cursed, Carlos. They've been cursed for centuries. Long ago, people practiced dark rituals here, offering sacrifices to the spirits of the land. The spirits grew angry, twisted by the sacrifices, and they linger. They draw people in, trap them. I didn't sleep that night, and I kept the door to my room locked, the pendant burning like an icy brand in my pocket. The next day I returned it to Señor Paulo, who took it without a word, his face pale and grim. He looked at me with a sadness that was almost pity, as if he knew that once you'd seen the spirits in the fields, they never truly left you. The rest of my trip passed in a blur, and I left Angola as soon as I could. But even back home, far from those cursed fields, I couldn't escape the feeling that something was watching me, following me. Every time I close my eyes, I see that twisted face, those hollow eyes staring into my soul, waiting for the moment when I'll be alone, when they can finally take what I owe them. And every time it rains, I hear my mother's voice again, calling me from somewhere far away, pleading, begging me to come back to the fields and finish what I started.